Beautiful template, but in this dream, we know that Yaakov was said to have been worried about the number of rungs each angel ascended, because that represented the number of years of their dominance as a world empire, and that Edom's angel disappeared into the clouds,
never came down,
and Yaakov is like, what is going on here? And he's told by Hashem, basically that's because he goes into the latter days, but. There were the latter days, exactly.
I just have that. Yitzchak, were you thinking of went out to find a doctor and never came by?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
So I was, but at the same time that I happened to be reading this Torah parsha and looking into for the book, I was also reading a book that was a primer on genetics and DNA, and it struck me that because all things are in the Torah, I had suddenly come upon Hashem placing the DNA strand in the Torah.
Wow.
Jacob's descendants would see this angel descending into the future in the latter days. And we see this in the Western world. We see this in and I'm going to say this, I might get in trouble, but it's in the Christian church.
I want to show that nobody really knows the actual answer.
See, I wanted to ask you, this is exactly what I wanted to ask you. And you know, you've written this book, and I was very, very impressed with
the word sulam is probably, now I can't prove this yet, but it may be the origin of the Swedish word slalom. Okay? And a slalom is when you literally shush down a snow bank in a spiraling fashion.
Those Swedes.
Yeah, think about those guys.
Unbelievable.
But also Mazzoroth is to be
curly, right?
Yeah.
Right.
It's a beautiful template, but in this dream, we know that Yaakov was said to have been worried about the number of rungs each angel ascended, because that represented the number of years of their dominance as a world empire, and that Edom's angel disappeared into the clouds,
never came down,
and Yaakov is like, what is going on here? And he's told by Hashem, basically that's because he goes into the latter days, but. There were so it's a spiraling.
And actually, a sal, a basket, is actually made of woven weeds together in the same kind of lattice fashion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wow!
And this
is like having Isaac Moseson on the show.
Exactly.
Well, you're his
this
publisher.
is where I got the idea, because Isaac has taught me how to look for these words. He teaches all of us how to trace words back to the Hebraic roots.
I've been here in California. Here's some more verification of who I am. So I wanted to talk about this person right here. Now, TBN aired a movie called the Omega Code. Omega is also a symbol that is, kind of like a curved shape in Greek.
The gematria for that word sulam is the same gematria as the phrase ha-kohanim, the priesthood.
Wow.
And what do we know now because of DNA about the priesthood? We know that we can determine who the priests are through the DNA strand.
So that's like the Torah's testimony that the sulam, the ladder, is the template of DNA.
Right.
Jim, you are amazing.
The DNA
Calvin was right. We have to have you on the show more often, and it takes an email from Orange Grove, Oregon, to get me to realize that you have to be on the show more often.
Like a U. Anyhow, or a leer.
Do you know what you call people who donate to other people who live in that state? Organ donors. Ouch.
There's Jim Long. Whoa. He still has a little bit of jet lag.
Now, so he is named David. And in the movie, he's seen battling the devil. At the Temple Mount. Now, that's in 2000. Presently, we have in the United States, chair, this Obama guy. And it's funny because I looked it up 10 times, and I know what the gentleman's name means. I'm not saying he's that character. I believe that the character behind him. And so anyway, what I'm saying is that this person did the job of...
That was a fall from the ladder.
Oh, jet log.
Well, this is so incredibly intriguing that I'm on the edge of my seat, and I see that we're about to hear the music, but I just want everyone to know that Jim isn't going anywhere. He's going to be right here, and Yitzchak Reuven has big plans for the next half of Temple Talk as we really delve to the
Because
depths
at the end of the movie,
deepest
after he's
depths
successful,
of Parshat Vayetze.
they just show just a
All
new world
starts when
coming
Yaakov alighted
and some
upon the
points of
site
lights coming in, and I've noticed
the
my
Holy
whole
Temple.
life that I've never seen Christ actually coming. You know, and somebody depicting a new start ever. I've seen the computer say that the Lord is here. I've seen people left behind. I've seen in a movie where there's a prophet who disappears and reappears in California. So I want to show that nobody really knows the actual answer. And then also with this Aquila here. So I noticed in the past 6 years that Aquila has been lining up there in the west. Okay, now there's the Altair, and I'll show you that this is the Aquila's there. And we also note that Lyra is up here. So I know we have a beginning and an end and beginning. These become interchangeable, first and last and first, form of measure. This is beta, also omega, female, represented female, and this right here must be male. I've also noted that this is Chrysaetos male, and it's also connected with Michael, the prince.
Jacob's descendants would see this angel descending into the future in the latter days. And we see this in the Western world. We see this in and I'm going to say this, I might get in trouble, but it's in the Christian church.
See, I wanted to ask you, this is exactly what I wanted to ask you. And you know, you've written this book, and I was very, very impressed with it.
In the Chumash, they're called twins. But the way that we're often taught is because of the physical description of Esav, and it's one of the few places in the Torah where we actually see a physical description of someone. We have all these, we have this vast drama of figures, and we never know what anybody looks like.
What is this? Again, we always try to emphasize that when we're told these kind of details, these are not, you know, like children's tales or some sort of mythological thing. You know, there's a reason for everything that the sages say, and it really is. It behooves us, as Maimonides explains, when you find something that our sages teach us that seems to be just sort of a parody or an allegory, you must investigate. You must try and understand what they're trying to say. You must exposit and glean the lesson from it. And here, the idea that our sages are telling us is that this person was so full of almost an excess life force. He had so much Viagra in him. I don't know. He had so much power that Now, we pointed out also last week that there's only one other person in the whole Torah, beginning to end, Tenakh, who is described as Admoni, which means red.
It'd be David.
Exactly.
David HaMelech.
Except that the same verse that calls him Admoni goes on to say that he had Yefeh Einayim. He had beautiful eyes.
Right.
So the difference is, as David, the Torah is telling us, also was firmly rooted in the ground. David is Mashiach. He had to be able to deal with people. He's completely understanding and a master of this world, but he sanctified it.
Yeah. That's because he took on, it's as if he came out of the tent and he learned the lesson that was taught in Hashem, even saying, let's describe this charade. Let's go into the details. He actually put on those garments of Adam Rishon, of Adam, and the goat skins. He put on the physicality, but yet he spoke with the he spoke with the voice of Yaakov. And these two brothers, it struck me, and this is what I investigate in the book, I wanted to extrapolate from the time of the latter, like, okay, how did Esav, how did Edom and Yaakov even go into the future?
I'm going to turn the microphone back over to James D. Long, Professor Emeritus of all sorts of things. And Jim, here you go.
Well, thank you. We were talking during the break about why I, undertook to write this particular book called Blood Brother, and it's because I was fascinated with the aspect of this, the whole thing of the sale. And so what I do in the
sale
book...
of the birthright?
The sale of the birthright, because what I do in the book is I begin with that, and then I take the reader in a kind of a flashback all the way back to Gan Eden to set up and say, how did we get from there to this point where a son who is to take the mantle of leadership literally, and I'm talking about Esav, because his father thought he had everything he needed to be the leader. He had the strength, he had the chutzpah, he had the prowess to be a leader of Israel. This would be a king of Israel. How did he get to a point where he basically tossed off this mantle and laughed it off? And I was fascinated by the fact that the boys are called in Chumash, they're called twins. But the way that we're often taught is because of the physical description of Esav. It's one of the few places in the Torah where we actually see a physical description of someone. We have this vast drama of figures, and we never know what anybody looks like. It's a beautiful template, but in this dream, we know that Yaakov,
and I'm looking for that face of an eagle,
was said to have been worried about the number of rungs each angel ascended, because that represented the number of years of their dominance as a world empire, and that Edom's angel disappeared into the clouds,
never came down,
and Yaakov is like, what is going on here? And he's told by Hashem, basically that's because he goes into the latter days, but. There were the latter days, exactly.
I just have that. Yitzchak, were you thinking of when I had to find a doctor and never came by?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
So I was, but at the same time that I happened to be reading this Torah parsha and looking into for the book, I was also reading a book that was a primer on genetics and DNA, and it struck me that because all things are in the Torah, I had suddenly come upon Hashem placing the DNA strand in the Torah. We know Moshe Rabbeinu had a speech impediment. Boom. End of story. That's all we know about him. But Esav is physically described. And it occurred to me, again, I discovered something about Torah when I came across that, and that is that the Torah, even the way it tells you things, is an instruction. And the reason that it told us about his physical aspect was to tell us this is a physical being. And we often, because the two brothers are often portrayed in such a disparate or reversed roles, we often don't think that they look like each other.
They actually were, and this is an unbelievable thing to learn that people seem to be unaware of, but they're actually identical
Exactly.
twins. The symbolic interpretation and your understanding of Esav and Yaakov. So I'm going to just put it to you straight out. Who do you think is Esav in the world today?
I think Esav is, first of all, in the philosophical and the philosophical front, it is the Western world and in Christianity, because and this is going to anger, I know you've got Christian fans out there, but the point is that Esav, being a mirror image also of Jacob, he mirrored Jacob through the ages.